Hi, Leroy. Hi, Karen.
Morning.
Good morning.
Oh, sad voices, huh?
I'm not that, just tired.
Ha ha ha. What else is new, Leroy?
True.
That's true, right? What about you, Karen? Are you sad or tired?
I think I'm just a little tired today.
Right. Okay, well, let's hope it's going to be over soon. This part. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen next? Not yet. Oh, where are our slides? Oh, here they are. Okay, good. Okay, it's just going to be the three of us. That's nice. I don't mind a small crowd. Okay, let's start. I'm happy because today and next week is all about language. Yay! When I defended my PhD, when I told you before, it is in linguistics. I was a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania. Um, and I was looking for jobs and I was applying to various positions, not very successfully the first year until the second year. My mentor said, "Hey, why are you applying for jobs in linguistics? Why don't you apply for jobs in psychology?" And that sort of like a bulb went in my head, thinking, oh, yeah, why not? But this means that having to teach psychology all this time and less so linguistics makes me nostalgic. So whenever I get a chance to talk about linguistics, I'm happy. So let's hope that you guys can relate to that. All right, just a little bit of housekeeping stuff. Again, I'll repeat that on Thursday. So you should start collecting data for our last experiment, lexical decision. The access code is just like the previous two, except it's underscore 3. And the data are required to be collected by November 17th, which is, 2 weeks from now. And then, of course, you will have the usual 2 weeks to write lab report 3. The good news that there is no quiz on Monday or by Monday, because we will do a class quiz next Thursday, November 12th, and it's going to be on Genie, the secret of the wild child. So again, only for you. You guys are always here, so it's not an issue. But if you have partners who are not always here, just remind them that next Thursday is the Thursday to be present. The readings for next week are not from the textbook because we don't have anything on, well, there's a little bit on language acquisition, but it's not enough for us to talk about it. So I have posted 3 things. 2 of them are kind of longish, but they are not a textbook quality material. These are excerpts from a book that was written by Russ Reimer, who wrote a book on Genie. So in 1992, the New Yorker magazine published 2 relatively short excerpts from that book. And that's what is posted for you. So Genie Part 1 and Genie Part 2. So they are relatively easy reading, although they're 20 pages long each. So again, that will help you immensely to do the test on the 12th. Because this was scanned from the original articles, you'll see that there are a bunch of sort of redacted white spaces because that's where lots of ads were. So in fact, it's not even 20 pages, probably like 10. And there is a third reading, which is an actual chapter from undergraduate textbook on language development and psycholinguistics. And this chapter is indeed on language acquisition as is. So I encourage you to read all 3 if you can. You have enough time between now and next Thursday, which is almost 10 days. So I don't feel bad asking you to read a bit more than usual. Okay, this is what's left until December. We will do language acquisition, like I said, not from the textbook next week. We will move on to concepts right after language acquisition, which is chapter 10. It's not bad. It requires some thinking, especially semantic networks. You will have your usual quiz 10, which is due November 16th, Monday, 10 p.m. And then just before Thanksgiving, we will have chapter 11, problem solving, and quiz number 11 due November 23rd. And what's left, as you know, is just 1 week and 1 day in December, where we will finish chapter 12, and you guys will submit your lab report 3. And on the 8th, we will see what we need to do. It's sort of up in the air. We can just have a party. Hey, why not? A Zoom party. Okay, so that's the logistics. Now, moving on to chapter 9, language. Again, because I'm a linguist, I can sort of step away from talking about the exact components of chapter 9. They mostly spend a lot of time on psycholinguistics and less on linguistics, and I want to switch that a little bit. Yeah, there is acquiring language, but it's like 9 pages. All right, so that would be helpful to review as well. So let's talk about what makes language so special. We'll compare that to animal communication systems. Then we'll talk a little bit about the actual hierarchical organization of language. That is, the technical terms for those are phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and so on. focus a little bit on language production as a part of psycholinguistics. Again, I don't expect us to get through everything today, so we'll finish on Thursday and do a bunch of exercises if we can, and talk about lab 3. I only looked at formatting basically, and there are some issues, so we need to fix those before lab 3 is due. Okay, so let's start with basic principles. Now here is the probably most exciting question for anybody who's doing psycholinguistics or psychology of language, whether language is unique to humans. So let me ask you guys. Leroy, do you have a pet?
Yes,
Which one?
I have the dog.
Ah, and is it a mutt, or does it come from a particular breed, or?
It's part Maltese and part Bichon.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Bichons have those wonderful little haircuts.
Yeah.
How old is she or he? Is it a boy or a girl?
About 2.5. He was a rescue.
Ah, okay. Nice. Very good. Karen, what about you? Do you have a pet?
Yes, I have a Shih Tzu.
A Shih Tzu. Wonderful. Okay, Parker, I know you don't have your mic, but you can type in the chat. Do you have a pet? You have cats. How many? 3. Whoa, that's a lot. Okay, so this is something that I'm sure you, all 3 of you, have asked yourselves at some time, living with the dogs and the cats, whether they actually have something. Do they communicate with you? So that's an interesting question. We know that they communicate. That's not even something that anybody would deny the animals. The question is how much your communication system is the same or different from human language. And here is my little take-home message, that what we call combinatorial rule system, and we'll keep talking about it throughout today, is what's missing in animal communication. That is, imagine that your dog or your cat knows a command. I don't know, let's say sit. Dogs do that, right? It's almost impossible to get the dog to do 2 commands simultaneously unless one next to the other, unless you train them as one command. So you can't say sit and bark, I don't know, voice, whatever that command is. So the problem is that for animal communication signals, each of them is completely individual and contextualized. That is, in the context of what's going on, this is the appropriate signal that the animal will give you. Whether it's a pet or a wild animal, that's kind of irrelevant. But that's not what language is. Language allows us to do all this and then some. And we'll see when we talk about Hackett's design features, that language is also recursive, which means we can take a part of a utterance or sentence and then embed it in the other one, and then embed something else, and then embed, that is, we will create a chain of sentences, basically unlimited. What's limited is our working memory. We can't hold on to more than a couple of them. But technically, nothing stops us from saying, this is the house that Jack built, and this is the bird that eats the grain in the house that Jack built, and so on. There are poems like this, I'm sure, nursery rhymes that you're familiar with. So we don't get that in the animal communication system. On the other hand, now if you look at somebody like Steven Pinker, who is probably the best known philosopher, language and linguist at Harvard, he calls language the crown jewel of cognition. That is, this is quintessential human. There's probably nothing else more human than language. Therefore, it's unique. It's what separates us from the animal kingdom. Um, there were other claims before that, for example, that humans are the only ones who can use tools. Well, we know that it's not quite true because primates can spontaneously use a tool in the wild. I'm not talking about animals who are in the labs and being trained, but generally, if a gorilla is in the woods and it cannot reach a banana, it may spontaneously use a stick to hit that banana down. So that was also a claim, and sort of walking upright, using tools and speaking language used to be the three main characteristics of humans that are unique. So there is that. This discussion has been going on for many years and continues to go. So there are people who work with primates, and we'll talk about them in a minute, who think that actually apes, and we're talking about gorillas and chimpanzees mostly, actually have a limited capacity for language. Now, the problem is how limited can a system be to count as language? Now, you guys think for a second. Uh, Leroy, do you think that your dog has language, that you can actually get her or him to understand what you're saying?
Language, no, but they can communicate and they're very in tune to your tone.
Of voice. Yeah, so good. So you see the difference between communication and language. Karen, what do you think about your Shih Tzu?
I don't know. I'm not really sure. She doesn't tend to communicate that much.
Oh, interesting. Well, could be also a personality issue, right? I mean, her personality may be quiet.
I think so, and I think that she has a little bit of anxiety too.
Ugh.
Sometimes she tends to crawl under tables and hide behind the couch.
Oh God. Oh well, maybe she needs also Xanax, like
Maybe.
humans. Parker, what about your cats? Do you think they talk to you, so to speak? Again, just type in the chat. Cats are kind of different from dogs. I often hear from people who have dogs, and I don't, but my daughter does. They understand their names, and when they want to be petted, they start rubbing themselves. That's the most I can get. Yeah, okay. Now you can see it's a world of difference between what we can do and what the animals can do. Perfect. Good. At least I don't need to spend a lot of time convincing you that what animals do is not language, and that's good. That's good. Okay. So what are these communication systems? They sort of bring us to the point that we can talk about language as more or less unique. So the fish on the right is called stickleback, and the stickleback, the male sticklebacks have what is known as the zigzag dance. So they kind of go like this in the mating period. And the female sticklebacks sort of perk themselves up a little bit to show that they are going to reciprocate the zigzag dance of the male version. So there are quite a lot of people who work on various obscure, for us humans who don't do that stuff, obscure species. But the most well-known one, which is not so obscure, is of course the waggle dance in bees. So bees obviously have to find the source of food, and usually these are female working bees that are sterile. They actually cannot, you know, propagate, so to speak. So what they do, they fly around looking for flowers, and then they code this information. That is how far that source is, what kind. I'm not sure if they can actually distinguish different flowers, but at least the sort of the intensity or the volume of nectar and the direction. So when they come back to the beehive, they do this waggle dance, so that they kind of move like this. And all the components of that waggle dance communicate to the rest of the bees where the source is, how far, how much stuff is in there. What's interesting is that um, obviously we have many different subspecies of those bees in various countries. And in Europe, for example, I read this article some time ago that on the border between Italy and was it Switzerland? I think so. I mean, literally, there is a border, but it's a political entity. It's not a geographical border. Turns out that the bees from the Italian side do, well, do this dance a little bit differently from the bees on the Swiss side, as if they speak dialects of their communication system. That's kind of neat. So it turns out that if a bee, for whatever reason, an Italian bee flies into the Swiss beehive, the Swiss bees will be confused because they would not understand the coding of the Italian bee. Go figure. So it's interesting. Yeah, you could, again, remember that you can use any part of the material from the lecture for your own individual blog. That's activity that I haven't figured out as an activity for you. Now, the probably more interesting part is the bird song. Okay, so again, just like with the fish, the sticklebacks that I talked about a second ago, it's the male birds that do that, while female are receiving on the receiving end. There's also this interesting point that the song that the birds produce is sort of dialectal, that is, at different areas, the same birds will sing differently. Interestingly, that they also are learning the song from their father, usually, because that's, again, the male that sings, not the female. And some of them can actually stay silent for a few months, and then suddenly they will sing a perfect song. So there is supposedly a critical period for song acquisition, and we'll talk about that next week when we talk about critical period in language acquisition. So it's interesting to look at the bird communication as another interesting example of animal communication system. So if you're into bird watching or bird reading or whatever you may be interested in, I suggest you do this activity and find out about bird song in sparrows. An interesting point. Plenty of labs who study songs in sparrows. Okay, now of course we want to move away or further away from the sort of the lower levels of life in the animal kingdom into sort of higher level. But there are some parallels between birdsong and human language. So, for example, it is universal. That is, unless something drastic happens to the fledgling, to the little bird, or to the human child, the language will be there and the birdsong will be there. So they're universal in that sense, that they always happen. There is no need to sort of hit the child on the head and say, no, you're not doing it right. There is no reinforcement from parents. We don't really, I mean, we do play with babies, but we don't really spend any substantial amount of time trying to teach them language, nor do those baby birds just listen to their father sing. Again, critical period seems to be, obviously its duration and other components are different, but in terms of that, if a fledgling or a human child does not get exposure to the birdsong or language by a certain period, then it's almost 100% that they will not learn to speak or they will not learn to sing. Now, that is perhaps an exaggeration, as you will see in Jeannie's case, but it's nonetheless pretty much sure. And the other interesting point, of course, we knew that from adults who learn a second language in adulthood, maybe high school or college. What happens if you are not exposed to that language before the end of the critical period, which for pronunciation is actually quite early? Then you will be saddled with a second language accent for the rest of your life. I mean, you can be a really good advanced speaker of the language, but your pronunciation will almost always give you up to native speakers. They will say, which country did you come from, right? So it's interesting. I came to the United States when I was 29, so most older, perhaps, maybe not Leroy at that moment, but the other, Karen and Parker. And I'm pretty good speaker of English from what people tell me. But it's interesting to hear what people say when they listen to me in different parts of the country. I once gave a talk, where was that? In Oregon, in Eugene. And, we had a little reception at the end, and there was a very distinguished linguist sitting there at the table. He was just glued to me. I was kind of looking at me, and I was a little unnerved, thinking, okay, what am I doing wrong? He's looking at me so much. And then he said, look, your accent is so interesting. I can trace the Pennsylvania Dutch in it. And I was like, no, I'm from Moscow. I'm Russian. Anyway, so you get that. But that's, probably is even perhaps a little bit of a charm if somebody has an interesting accent but can speak quite well. So, and the same interestingly happens to birds. So if a bird, for whatever reason, is transported to another region at a young age, that bird will learn to sing that area's song, but it will be with some differences, sort of like a second language accent in humans, which is interesting, right? Okay. The most probably critical part for us is what we know about work with primates. Okay. And here we actually have three types of, I'm going to call them monkeys, but three types of apes and primates that we need to consider because there's so much work that has been done with that. So one type of primates that people have tried to teach language are gorillas. So Coco is probably the most famous case of gorillas learning a language. And then we have a bunch of chimps. So Washoe, Sarah, and Nim Chimpsky are all chimpanzees. So what's interesting is, before I give you an answer, mostly there's also bonobos, which Kanzi is probably the most well-known case. So gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. Now, here is an interesting point. Nobody has ever tried, for a reason, to teach primates to speak. So, I mean, you can communicate, as we know, using symbols, right? Or sign language or uh, ideographs, that kind of stuff, but not to speak. Can any of you guys guess why there have been no attempts to teach primates to actually say something, even something simple like hi? Go ahead, Karen. What's your... Oh, Leroy. Okay, whoever.
I would assume it's because, like, their vocal cords, they can produce the correct sounds.
Uh-huh. Excellent. Karen, you want to add something to that?
Um, I don't know about what Leroy said. I think that's actually a really good answer. I was also thinking maybe researchers just didn't have the resources to look at it.
Well, no, actually, the resources were plenty, especially early. But Leroy is right that there is something about the vocal apparatus of primates that doesn't allow them to produce. I mean, they have cries. I mean, they have vocalizations. They just can't produce articulations the way we do that. And do you know why? You probably don't. So that's my question: is that we have larynx right in here that is evolutionary in time of evolution of human species dropped. So if you look at primates, their vocal cords, vocal box, whatever, larynx, that's what we call it now, is actually very high. For us, it's low. So what happens, it allows us to create the airstream that we need from the lungs out of the nose and the mouth that allows us to produce the sounds. We normally produce sounds by exhaling, but there are interesting languages that have a few sounds that have to be produced as you inhale. But the problem now became, so because of the vocal tract and larynx that's lower, okay, we are very versatile in producing all kinds of speech sounds. However, the the price that we paid for this is the fact that we can choke, right? So when we get food or water and it goes, as we say, in the wrong tube, right? You can die, right? If somebody is not there to help you with this Heimlich maneuver, you can just choke to death. And it's one of the relatively common reasons why people die. So if the larynx were higher, that would not have happened. So the fact that we can speak and produce all these wonderful sounds makes us vulnerable. So that's one of the reasons why neither of the research teams that worked extensively with gorillas or chimps or bonobos would ever try to do that. So some of them are extremely, the results of working with these primates are extremely impressive. Coco knew, I think, about 200 symbols on a special board where she could just, use her fingers and click things. There is plenty of stuff on the web for you guys to learn a little bit about these efforts of working with gorillas and chimps in particular. So here's the thing. This is all sort of late 20th century, and Coco, for example, died, and Nimchimsky died. So many of them are gone. And there is, particularly now, there is no continuation of any of these programs. Like Karen said, it's extremely labor intensive and it's expensive. You have to have, a particular area where you can keep the animal. So, and there's also, as you know, animal activists who think that we should not even try to do that because that's not what these primates are sort of meant for, right? They're not meant to be taught a language. They're wild animals. So look up, there is perhaps another well-known case of kanzi that I mentioned. These bonobo, or bonobo, whatever the stress is. And Rainbow Sauvage is a very famous specialist in working with primates, and now she is in the dire straits because she's been ousted from her foundation. But the one that I posted for you, in case you are interested in sort of pursuing one of the topics, is to, let's go back and get rid of the annotations, is the story of Nim Chimpsky. Nim Chimpsky, of course, is a play on Noam Chomsky that we'll talk about in the next half hour. And Colombian scientist Herbert Terrace took Nim Chimpsky as a baby. And the idea wasn't just about language. It was about socialization and sort of acculturation of children. So the idea was to see if you take a baby primate, like a newborn, and raise that primate in the human environment with all the accoutrements of human upbringing, clothes and food and going out and talking and all of that, will that, in this case, Nim Chimpsky is a chimp, will that chimpanzee grow up to be more like us, like humans? That's a fascinating topic, right? But you can imagine that it took Herb 30 years to work with Nim Chimpsky. So I'm suggesting that you could watch a documentary on Nim, Project Nim, it's called. And then again, write your usual 200-word summary and ask some questions. And like I said, Nim Chimpsky died a few years ago, so the project is closed. The one, another sort of famous story is Alex the gray African parrot. And I would like to show you this. Let's just make sure that, first of all, I have sound. Oops. Maybe do it again and then. Share computer sound. Okay, good. So now we should be able to do that. So I want to show you this little clip of Alex because it was incredibly interesting. Okay, so let's do that. Share this. You guys have to stop me if you don't hear anything, because here it's very important to hear the sound.
We should all know parrots can articulate human words, but we may not be so sure whether they know what they are saying or are simply imitating sounds.
Okay, sound is okay?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
The story of Alex the parrot and how a 30-year psychological experiment amazed everyone who heard it helps to provide an answer. Stay with Animal Wise to know more. The origins of Alex and Irene. Alex was an African grey parrot born in 1976. When he was just over a year old, he came to be in the hands of American ethologist and psychologist Irene Pepperberg. Dr. Pepperberg named him Alex as an acronym for Avian Learning Experiment, as she was conducting a study at Indiana University, USA. Dr. Pepperberg's study. Irene wanted to teach Alex to demonstrate the intelligence of birds. Up until this point, science had claimed only primates had the ability to develop an understanding of language. It was believed that birds such as macaws, cockatoos, and other parrots could only imitate sounds without being aware of their meaning. To begin Alex's learning, Dr. Pepperberg decided to apply a teaching method based on 3 roles: the student, the trainer, and a model. In this case, Alex was the student, and he had to watch interactions between the trainer and the model displaying desired student behaviour. The idea was for the trainer to say a word, which the model would imitate, and then receive a prize for doing so correctly. Alex would not only notice the model getting rewarded for imitating the word, but he would become jealous of the interactions and want to be involved. Alex began to respond like the model so that he could receive the reward, the result Irene hoped for: Alex's intelligence. After much learning, Alex was able to identify objects, numbers, colours, and shapes. He could also differentiate between sizes and see other differences between objects. He came to use his own vocabulary, which consisted of around 150 words, eventually identifying letters and phonemes. He said sorry when he was wrong, and I want to go back when he was tired and wished to return to his cage. But this was not the only aspect which surprised the world. This incredible bird was able to ask a question. Looking at himself in the mirror, Alex seemed to ask what colour his own feathers were, something so exceptional no other animal had previously done so. According to Dr. Pepperberg, Alex had the same intellectual capacity as a 5-year-old child. She was able to demonstrate that parrots not only imitate, but are capable of reasoning at a basic level and creating words. The parrot acquired so much knowledge, he could be described as having his own personality. According to Dr. Pepperberg's students, Alex often used to tell them, "I want corn," or "I want to climb on your shoulder." There were even days when he hung his head and said, "I want to be tickled," as if he were a child. Alex is passing. Although African greys typically live an average of 50 years, Alex passed at only 31 years old. It happened on September 6, 2007. It is believed his death was due to the disease arteriosclerosis from which he suffered. It likely caused a stroke or heart failure. Pepperberg explained that on his final day, he said goodbye in his usual way. When Pepperberg said goodnight, he replied, "You be good, I love you, see you tomorrow." Dr. Pepperberg wrote a book as a tribute to Alex in which she collected her 3 decades of learning. In it she wrote the following: "His own conduct at the time of learning revealed to us how much remains to be discovered in the field of animal intelligence." If you want to continue learning about intelligent animals, you will want to hear the incredible story that we share here about Clever Hans, the mathematical horse.
Okay. Stop that. This clip doesn't have something that I wanted you to hear, so let's just listen to Alex's speech, which is very interesting. Okay, just give me a second. I have to kill that. Why are you doing this to me? Okay, here we go. Okay, let's try just 30 seconds of the other one with Alex's speech. The quality is not so great here.
Alex, what matter?
Whoa!
That's right. How many?
2.
That's right. You're a good boy. No,
Wanna go
sweetie.
back?
No, you can't go back yet. You gotta.
You want some water?
All right. Do you want some water, or are you just asking to interrupt? Are you just asking to interrupt? I know.
Go back?
I know. Okay. Look. What color bigger? What color bigger?
Green.
Green. Oh, you're a good boy. Okay, Alex, look. Look what I got for you. Hey, look. Look at all these neat toys. Look. Hey, look, can you tell me on the tray how many green block? Green block.
2.
Good parrot. 2 green block. 2. Good parrot. One of the things Alex doesn't have is a knee-jerk response to the types of objects that you present him. He can look at 2 objects and answer several different types of questions about them.
Okay. So you could hear the quality of Alex's voice, right? Of course, it's not human, but it's pretty articulate. Interestingly, if you notice that Irene Pepperberg, who worked with Alex, is not talking to him with full sentences, right? Her language is very reduced. And that was her decision intentionally to not to overburden Alex's, memory. Okay, great. So that sort of concludes our little comparison of animal communication with the human language. Now let's talk about human language per se. We'll start with this idea. Remember I said that the combinatorial rules are the ones that distinguish human language from animal communication systems, right? So we have symbols, we have words. Words consist of phonemes, sounds, and they can be combined in various ways. And those various ways are by rules. Okay, so there are certain rules of English, if we're talking about English, or rules of other languages where we know which sounds can go together, which cannot, and which words can go together. Okay, so that is quintessential base or basis for a human language. When we talk about words, we know that we have a collection of words called vocabulary. In psycholinguistics, this is known as mental lexicon, and it gives us, hey, semantic memory. When we talked about long-term memory, we distinguished episodic memory, that's the stuff that we experienced in our life, versus semantic memory, which are facts. So words are facts. We just happen to know a bunch of words. They are in the semantic memory. And rules are those ways, right? They're not something, it's not the rules that you were given when you were studying language arts at school. These are the rules that you use implicitly because you know how to speak a language. So you produce, as an adult, a native speaker, you produce only grammatical sentences. But somebody who's learning the language as an adult or a child will perhaps produce sentences that are ungrammatical, that is, they violate the rules of English. And that's why we have English classes for second language learners. Now, Charles Hockett was a early 20th century linguist who worked specifically on coming up with a set of features. He calls them design features that are specific to human language. And perhaps these are the ones that make it unique. So here is his list of those features. And if you would take any communication system and run it through the design features on the left, you should be able to answer the question whether this is a language or something else. So if you think at the first one, it says vocal auditory channel, which means that we produce our messages, our utterances by talking, right? And we receive on the other end utterances and sounds through our auditory sensory system. And we already know what that is because we talked about sensation and perception. So yes, you would say birdsong is like this, right? The birds produce voice messages and other birds hear that. Okay, so that particular feature is met in the birdsong communication system. Rapid fading, obviously, because the sound is only exists temporarily. Remember, we talked about echo system in the sensory memory, which only lasts about 2 seconds, much longer than the icon 500 milliseconds. Again, birdsong would perhaps live to the expectation of that. And we can continue to talk about a bunch of these features. I just want to bring your attention to a few of them that are the most important ones. So semanticity, which means that language sounds, not the individual sounds, but language sounds as combinations have meaning. They are for something. This something could be a referent, an object that exists in the outside world. Well, you could say an animal that sends a signal to his kin because there is an eagle or another predator is also doing that. There is a meaning to that signal, but not at the level of human meaning. We have, think about it, we have many ways in which our sounds can mean different things. Even if we think about a word like a bank, it could be a bank of the river, it can be a bank of like a financial institution. So we call it lexical ambiguity. These communication systems do not have anything like that. Another important feature is arbitrariness. That is, why is the word for something you write on a desk or a table in English, but stol parte in Russian, or mesa in Spanish, or whichever tish in German, whichever language you speak? Why are they different words? Shouldn't they be the same? We do have a small component of our lexicon, of our vocabulary, that we call onomatopoeia, and these are animal sounds. However, these animal sounds are quite different between languages. So Karen, how's you speak Albanian, right?
Yes.
Good. So what do Albanian dogs say?
I'm not sure.
How
I
about
feel like,
Albanian cats, maybe?
I don't know. I feel like my dog does understand Albanian because my dad talks to my dog in Albanian, but that's about it.
Okay. Amar, do you speak Arabic, right? Okay. Let's see, chat. Yes. So, Amar, what do Arabic dogs say? How do they bark? Or cats? Doesn't matter. Choose any animal. No? Well, again, we can use me as a cultural counterpart. So the Russian cats say meow, just like American cats. That's good. But I don't know about dogs, but cats are usually the same. Okay, so meow seems to be more or less universal across languages, or at least in our tiny little sample. But I can tell you something that's very different. So American pigs say what? Well, they say oink, 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 right, Leroy?
Yeah.
What about frogs, Leroy? What do American frogs say?
Ribbit.
Rivet, rivet. Okay, good. And the Russian pigs say chryu, 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 and the Russian frogs say quack, quack, quack. Very different, right? So even that little part where we would expect to see more or less universal representations, not arbitrary, still arbitrary. And that's one of the hallmarks of human language. We don't, I mean, we can go and do a little bit of reconstruction and go to proto language, but in general, there is absolutely no reason why this set of sounds means this thing. It's completely arbitrary, and that's what language is all about. Okay, discreteness, we'll skip, and displacement. Okay, we has a cat and he only understood when he speak in Arabic. Okay. So displacement allows us to kind of not be in the same place. Now, of course, if we are talking to somebody, that person needs to be within the distance for us to hear. But of course, we also have written language, so we can write things and they will be kept for posterity. So there is the separation in space and time, which is characteristic of human language. Nothing like that, let's say, if we're not talking about animal communication, but we're talking about science, let's say the yield and stop and whatever, it's a communication system, but doesn't have any of these features. So if we run human language through this list, we will see that out of many communication systems in the animal world and in our human inventions, like road signs, nothing comes close to language in meeting all these requirements. Productivity. That's the last one that I want to discuss. And the beauty of language is that you can always produce a sentence, believe it or not, that nobody has ever said before. Many of the sentences are very similar, but then if you really want to produce something, you can be very, very creative. And that means we don't have a finite system of either. Well, we do have a finite system of words in a way, but new words always come in and some words die. But when you combine the words into sentences, that's when productivity shines, because you can be extremely productive. And people who are writers and poets are not well known for being very productive with words. Okay, a few other distinctions that perhaps you're familiar with. So when you listen to somebody say something, you comprehend, and that's called comprehension. When you say something, that's called production. You're producing speech. So psycholinguists, people who study psychology of language, usually specialize in one or the other because they're quite different if you start thinking about it. I already mentioned that we have a relatively late invention in our approach to languages. That is, we have a written form of many languages, but far from all of them. And there was a very important movement in the 19th and 20th century when missionaries would come to Africa or Asia, and they would, or languages of Native Americans, they would create a written system for these languages. But ultimately, language evolved as a spoken system. And something that you're very familiar with, I hope you remember that, we have bottom-up and top-down processing in language as well. So producing sounds is going to be bottom-up, but interpreting a sentence consisting of these sounds and words would require us to have vocabulary, which is our semantic memory, and that's going to be top-down processing. So all of that is sort of integrated in the text of chapter 9. So I already showed you Hawker's features, and this is just a simpler way to perhaps summarize the properties of human language. That is meaning, semanticity, reference, okay, arbitrariness, that there is a reference somewhere, but why it is this reference, we don't know. Of course, it has to have a communication purpose, a communicative purpose. So interpersonal, we need somebody to talk to and somebody to listen to us. And we will talk about structure next with this enormous numbers that allow us to think about productivity and creativity. If you think of, let's say, English, which is not quite the case, let's say we take 20,000 words of English vocabulary, which would be approximately middle school to high school level. Just using these words, we can create 10 into 30th power of sentences. That's why it is always possible to create a sentence that nobody has ever pronounced or has ever heard. And if we only take like 1 second to produce these sentences, right, takes 10 in ninth power of seconds in a century. So to get from the bottom number to the top one takes a few centuries. And of course, nobody has ever recorded any of them. So that is why language is so fantastically infinite and exciting. Let's just talk about this and then take a little break. So we will talk about hierarchical organization of language, and that's, again, something that makes it very special. So we have phonemes. These are the sounds. And in English, we have approximately 40, but we have languages that have over 100 sounds. Morphemes are parts of the words, and these are the parts that have a meaning. Phonemes don't have any meaning. They're just sounds. But morphemes do. So if you have a root like table, the table is the root. There's nothing else there, but it is referring to a particular referent out in the world. But you can, for example, make it a plural. You can say tables. Now that's going to be what we call a suffix. So suffix attaches to the root and it becomes a new but related word. There's also things like open and closed class. So words that can come into the language, be invented or borrowed from another language, make them open class. But words like prepositions, in, on, under, articles, and the, these are the closed class items. We will never invent new articles or new prepositions. They're just there and we can list them. They're not that, there's only 2 articles. There's a bunch of prepositions, but still 50 or 60 compared to the number of roots that is basically unlimited if we decided to borrow something. So here in English, the upper estimate of a potential vocabulary, not an individual human, but in general in the language, is about 200,000. That's a lot, and that's because we can combine roots with suffixes and prefixes, and a prefix would be something that gets attached to the beginning of the word as opposed to the end of the word. So to run and to rerun. Re is going to be a prefix. And then this is the number again, 1 nonillion. I didn't even know that the word like this existed in English. Okay, we can combine into phrases and sentences, and these phrases can grow from mommy go store, which is not a very good English, to something that becomes mommy goes to the store, which is perfect English. And a 3-year-old or even 2.5-year-old can easily produce such sentences. All right, it's 11:09, so let's take a break until, what shall we say, 11:15. Okay. I'm here if somebody wants to ask me a question or chat. Okay, so now we are ready to move on to the next, probably the most difficult component of that chapter, that has to do with the hierarchical organization of the language. I already showed you the slide about the levels that we as linguists distinguish in any language. Okay, so this is how we would think about it. So the sentence that we will use as an example, could be any other sentence, is the umpires talked to the player. So that's the sentence at the top right here. And we can easily read it because obviously we all are highly educated people. But we will start from bottom up, and we'll talk about the components that are hierarchically organized until we get to the sentence, which gives us the meaning. And that's the ultimate goal of language, is to transmit the meaning of the thought that you have in mind. So the bottom, as you can see, the bottom level is called phonetics and phonology. Phonetics is about the pronunciation of the sounds. Phonemes, phonology, is a more abstract level when you say that certain sounds together give us this particular phoneme, and I'll explain it a little bit in a second. Now, the symbols that you see here are a little crazy. This is what is known as International Phonetic Alphabet. It allows us, those who study languages, to record any language without actually physically recording it. We can write how the words are pronounced using this International Phonetic Alphabet, and I'll show it to you in a second. Some of these symbols are familiar to you, like Z, right? Remember, this is not a letter, this is a sound. That's why in many linguistic exercises you will see square brackets like this. Square brackets mean the sound, versus phonemes, the abstract level, where you will see slanted brackets like this. It's not a very good rendition, which means that this T is an abstract T and can represent different T's. So in English, as you know, when the T starts a syllable that is followed by a vowel, we pronounce it in English with a little bit of a puff called aspiration. So you'll say team, right? As opposed to, you could say team. And people who learn English as a second language often don't get aspiration immediately. But this aspiration is not there when the second sound after T is not a vowel, but a consonant like R. So you say try. You don't say try. Again, these are the rules of English. So to represent these two different T's, sort of the clean T and the aspirated T, the different sounds, you will use this phonetic representation, or phonological representation, I should say. Okay? So let's look at the phonemes first. So we will start from the bottom. Okay, so that's the bottom level. And using the International Phonetic Alphabet, we can record this entire sentence using these symbols. So English, the is represented by this funny symbol. And this means that it has voice in it. So it's pronounced as a the, versus another one that looks like this. It's the same sound, but voiceless, th. So it's many sounds come in pairs like this. And again, we'll use English because it's a little easier, but if I need to, I'll demonstrate some other sounds for you in Russian. So who can tell me, so this is voiced, that is your vocal cords slightly participate because they're not participating as much as in the vowels, while th has no vocal cords involved. Who can tell me if we take sound p, what would be the, so p is voiceless. What would be the voiced counterpart of p in English? Well, try the following. Just use your hand and put it on your larynx. So now say p, 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 p. You feel no vibration, right? Now try to put your voice into that. What's going to happen to that p? What will it become? I guess. Parker, what do you think? What's going to happen to p if we add voice to it? Well, it will continue to be voiceless if it's p. How do you make it voiced? No. Okay, p, and voiced counterpart of p is b, right? It is exactly the same sound in terms of how our articulators are working, but it's b, b. So if you put your hand again on your larynx, you should be able to see that in your, see it, feel it, right? Okay, and that was a difficult question. Let's try the next one. So z, z, z. Put your hand on your larynx. Do you feel the vibration when you say z? Now I'm asking you to turn off your voice and try to produce a sound that's voiceless. What would that be? Karen, what do you think? It's hard. Okay, well, again, zzz, no voice, but the same articulation as for Z. Yes, Parker, exactly. It's going to be s, right? Z, s, z, s. I know it sounds funny. So yes, Z is going to be an S. Okay, good. Let's do T. So T is voiceless. What would be the voiced counterpart of T if you add voice to it? But the problem, the difference here between the S and Z are sort of long consonants, while T is very short ones. So what would T become if you add voice to it? So try again. T, t, nothing. Now add voice. Turn your vocal cords on and say T with the vocal cords participation. Leroy, what do you think? What would be the counterpart of T with voice? Duh, yes, Parker, again, beautiful. So T and the voiced one is D. Okay? So the same is here. The, f, b, b, z, s, t, d, right? Now we can, let's see, can we stop that for a second? I'll come back to that. I want to see if I can show you how it works. Okay, let me see if I can open one of my sound programs. Okay. Okay, good. So let me see if you will see it when I share the screen with you. So I have opened one of the speech analyzer programs, Okay, it's called cool edit, doesn't matter. So what you see is just blank screen, right? It's gray. Can you guys see it? Good. All right, so what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna record that sentence. The umpire talked to the players, right? And I'll have to say okay. And now I'm gonna try to record it. The umpire talked to the players. Stop. So what you can see here is my rendition of that sentence. So if I play it for you, hopefully you'll hear it. Okay, so this, as you can see, there's a bunch of little spikes. This is the ambient sound, which if you are in a nice place where you don't have ambient sound, these would be just plain line type, like the one before the sentence. But what you see is, can I annotate? Maybe I can. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, yes. What you can see is something where the spike is tallest. That spike here is the vowel. That's umpire. So oo, e, all of those will give us these spikes. The smaller spikes are those consonants like s and z. And s is not going to give us anything, but z will, right? So whenever you see a spike, that is a part of the word. So let's play. Let me get rid of this. And let's play from here. Players, right? So this spike here is A. So let me do another one. No. Okay, so now I'm gonna just say, to give you a chance, I will say s, z, t, d. You will see, hopefully, that they will look different. S, z, t, d. Okay, so this is s, right? You see the difference, right? So s, the first one, is voiceless, but there is this sort of prolonged vibration, so you get some spikes. Z, it has vocal cords vibrating, so you get a lot of that. Here is t. It basically has nothing because it's called a stop. You stop the airstream from escaping your mouth. But d, which is produced with vocal cords, give us these spikes. These are called formants. That is the sound intensity. I'm not going to talk to you about any of these details. I just wanted to show you that now. Okay, let's do one more thing, which will allow us to finish this. Let's do vowels. Okay, so I'm going to say a bunch of vowels. U, E, E. Now look at these spikes, right? Aren't they nice? So this is So here, the more you open up your mouth, right? I'm simplifying things. The more airstream is coming out of your mouth. Is an open vowel, so it gives us the highest spikes of all. Is sort of in the middle. It's also open, but not as open as But U and E don't have the opening so much, so the spikes are much smaller. Okay, so that's a nice way to think about how sounds work. Let's go back to where we were. Here we go. Okay, so our International Phonetic Alphabet, allows us to represent a bunch of interesting sounds. So this is all about speech. It's about spoken language. So as you can see, here is our larynx. Again, see how low it is, right? Think about you guys who have Adam's apple. We don't, because your vocal cords are at a different angle. That's why your voices for men are lower than for women. And here is how we open our mouth. And remember, I told you that we produce sounds when the air goes out. And there are very few languages that allow us to produce sounds by inhaling. Okay? Then we have tongue, which is very important for producing vowels. So for the tongue is really, really low, giving us a very open cavity. For it is higher. And for e and u, it's the highest, giving us different degrees of opening of the oral cavity, so to speak. For languages like French, we can also produce sounds, especially vowels, by pushing the air through the nose, giving us what we call nasal vowels. So if anybody speaks French, you will hear something like on. That means that some air is coming through the nose, giving us on that is pronounced with this nasal quality. Many languages have nasal vowels, not English, but like I said, French is a good one. And then within sort of, let me get rid of this. Within this, so this is nasal cavity for nasal vowels. Within the mouth, we also have locations of where we can stop the airstream. So like we can close our lips, right? Or we can bring them together, giving us what we call the labial consonants. So p, b, m. These are all produced so the airstream stops at the lips, giving us what is known in linguistics as labial or lip sounds. Okay? But we can also use the tongue and lift it all the way to the palate, and we will, so for lips, the airstream stops here. For those sounds, they're called dentals. T, d, s, z. These are all dentals. We stop the airstream here. Now you can imagine we can also produce sounds when we stop the airstream at the back. And these are k, g, ng. And there are languages, Arabic, Amr, you probably can produce for us a sound where the stoppage is actually here, quite low, giving us pharyngeal sounds. Amr, do you have a mic? I do, but my house is loud. Well, but only for a few seconds. If you could produce some couple of words for us where you say k, g, they're really, really low, the sounds that don't exist in English but exist in Arabic. Could you do that for just a few seconds?
Do you mean like Gamal?
Okay, even deeper.
Rain?
Ah, good. That's the one. Say it again.
Rain?
Fantastic. What does it mean?
It's like I.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now you can turn it off. So you could hear that, right? It's a very low sound. The stoppage for the airstream is somewhere lower than for English, k, g. Okay? There are languages that have very strange sounds. There's a language called Ku. Let's see if I can show you this because it's really fun. So give me a second. Ku is one of the African languages spoken around Botswana. And in ku, you have sounds called clicks. Now, before I describe them to you, I want to see if I can quickly play. Language, okay. Okay, good. So let's listen to clicks, and they are real sounds. That means if you have to produce a click to say a word like horse, I don't know, I'm just guessing. Okay. Again, it's important that you should hear the sound.
This is Franz.
Thank you.
He's a member of the San tribe and lives right here, alone, in the middle of the Namibian desert.
Do you get lonely by yourself? Yeah. Sometimes.
When he was young, his grandfather taught him how to survive in the desert, and now he's an expert on living in this environment.
We have a big problem of water here, is no water. Our water coming from there, where you can see the solar panels.
Franz makes a living as a desert guide to tourists like myself who pass by. He can literally tell you anything about the Namib desert, its animals and landscape.
Spider, there's 7 different species. Dancing white spider, wheeling spider, spore spider, jumping spider, baboon spider, sand-eyed spider, and a 6-eyed crab spider, the really poison one.
He has the biggest smile I've ever seen and a great sense of humor.
You have to driving a long way to Swakopmund from here, 230 kilometers. The road is not good. All the time, when you get there, it's really tired, take shower, give you nice food, eat full, drinking a little beer. When you go and sleep, you can
The desert is his home. He doesn't wear shoes because there's no need. He has a massive scar from a snake bite, but most impressively, Franz knows 11 languages fluently.
Kavango, Kwangari, Mbunza, Sambyu, Viriko, Kwanyama, Damara, Nama, Herero, Himba, Afrikaans, and English.
Today he's going to tell us about his mother tongue, the San dialect, also known as Bushman language, or as my ears tell me, the clicking language.
If I greet you, how are you? You have to say, Nkia, itimamide, Nkia, Nkia, I'm fine. Yeah, nothing. Go. Nama, Damara, they have 4 different clicks, and Bushman 7 different clicks.
I noticed that Franz's clicking language is reflected in the way that he communicates by using sound effects with his hands and mouth.
Keep running again, the seat in the middle of the ship where they're just jumping out.
How bizarre is that? Today is the first and last time I'll meet someone like Franz. And
okay. So I hope you heard the clicks that he was producing. That's very impressive. And these are real sounds, just like T and D in English. Okay. Again, just to remind you that our primate relatives don't have that. Therefore, they cannot produce spoken language. So this is the International Phonetic Alphabet with the sounds of English. And these are vowels only. So you can see that there's also a dimension. I talked to you about tongue height, low giving us high opening, mid giving us sort of mid opening, and high, the tongue is high, meaning that the opening is very narrow. But there's also another dimension called front, central, and back. A front is where you produce sounds close to the lips. So e, many languages have this like English. And then there are back vowels that are produced at the back of the oral cavity, u, o, and so on. Okay, so English, as you can see, has a nice inventory of vowels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's also schwa, 6, and 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, some of these vowels are not pronounced differently in some dialects of English. So words like Mary and like woman Mary and Merry Christmas can be pronounced the same depending on the area that you're coming from. Now, other languages, Spanish, for example, is well known for having just 5 vowels. easy stuff. Russian is not particularly difficult, but Russian has one particular vowel that is very difficult for non-native speakers to produce, and it's So if you think about a bunch of words that only are distinguished by vowels, you have to be able to sort of produce that. So my favorite example is mushka, mashka, mishka, mishka. So the last one was the one with this vowel which my American husband can never produce in God knows how many years. Okay. So, clear. And phonemes, remember I said these are the units that unite similar sounds. Okay. So here is, think about if we take these phonemes, we can combine them under certain conditions. And we also cannot combine them under other conditions. So something like pretos is not a word of English, but it's possible because we have a combination of p and r in other words, like pray. Glitos is also not a word of English, but G and L exist in other English words like glitter, right? But telitos is not only not a word of English, but this combination of TL does not exist in English at all. So there is nothing in English that is TL. But of course, in other languages, that this is totally normal. And languages like Polish, for example, can have up to 5 consonants in one place, which is a challenge for pronunciation. Most languages prefer to have a consonant and a vowel, a consonant and a vowel. And that's because it's much easier to produce than a bunch of consonants in one place. Now, if you think about the other way, so we just talked about production of speech. Now we can talk just for a minute about how we understand spoken sounds, right? That is comprehension, production, comprehension. So first we have to understand the acoustic input, that is, which sounds are we hearing? Now, if you are just learning a language, it's excruciatingly difficult. Now think about babies who are learning their native language. For them, it is also very difficult, but they have this massive exposure to this acoustic input. So they're listening to these sounds and they're figuring them out. Okay. Then they have to translate that, right? So that now we're going the other way. We're going not from production, we're going through comprehension, trying to understand what the person is saying. So we have to now translate the sounds into those phonological codes. So different T's will give us one T in our mental representation of that word. All right. And gradually, the acoustic or auditory form will be sort of coming online for us. So if somebody says t, you start thinking about all potential words in your vocabulary that start with the T. Now, as it continues, tr, what happens now, you try to think of a bunch of words with the onset, that's the beginning of the word that has TR in it. So we have tree and try and transit, a few. But those who don't have an R in the second position will disappear at this point. So now the third vowel comes in, the third sound, it's a vowel. So now it's tr. Again, tree, maybe train, because it's not the written form, it's the spoken form. As we continue to hear more of these sounds, now comes the tres. Can some of you guys type in the chat what could be a word that starts with the TRES in English? Treasure. Okay, good. Trespass. Fantastic. Excellent. Yay. Trestle could be another one, right? But once we get a P, then Parka and Amr are correct. That's it. There is only one English word that has TRESP in the beginning of the word. So this is called the uniqueness point. At this point, we know which word we're talking about. So if you think about, and that's an interesting question that you could perhaps answer in one of your activities. I mean, how do babies learn to segment if they don't have any vocabulary yet, right? And that's a big question for anybody who's working in the area of language acquisition. We'll talk about it next time. Okay, so this segmentation is a very complex process. There's also noise, right? There's all kinds of other sounds. People make pauses, they fill them in with like stuff. And the problem is we don't have exactly the same sounds coming out of different people. All right. So a baby is listening to his or her mother, a father, a guest who comes in, grandparents. They all are different. Okay. And also when the two sounds come together right next to each other, they influence each other, right? So you can pronounce things differently depending on what precedes and that follows that sound. So in a language like Mandarin, which is a most spoken Chinese version in the world, there are 4 tones. That is, the vowels are pronounced with different pitches. So for example, if you say ma, that's flat, but you can say ma, that's your pitch that goes down. You can say ma, it's a pitch that goes up, or you can produce something where down and up, ma. All of these ma's are different. They mean different things. They have different reference. The problem is if you put 2 of them together, you'd say ma, ma, the different tones will affect each other, producing something not exactly either or. And that is very difficult for somebody who is not a native speaker of that language. There's also things like prosody, or what we call inflection sometimes. Are you pronouncing things sort of flat? And as we know, we even have a word like this, to drone, somebody who is at the same kind of level, which is not normal, right? That's not how we speak. And there are also cadence, that is, we break in between phrases and between clauses. All of that allows us to do speech segmentation, but it's an enormous feat. That's why even for many second language speakers, they can kind of say things themselves. They can certainly read, but the comprehension can be really lagging behind production, just because this is so difficult to do speech. We don't even talk in sort of with pauses. We talk normally, which is fast and difficult. All right, that concludes our little phonology. Let's move on to morphology and see if we can finish that before the end of the class. So now we are moving up one level. All right, so we take these sounds, okay, and we create bits of words from them. Now, remember I said for English, we really talk about 3 things. We talk about root. So umpire, all right, is a root. Why is it a root? Because we know what it means. It's the referee in the baseball game, for example. And then we have 2 potential parts that come and get glued to the root, either at the back, that's called the suffix. So here's your suffix, right? Or in the front, which we don't have in this example, but you can imagine having something like RE, a very common prefix in English, means to repeat things or redo things. No, redo, perfect, right? And usually they're depicted with these little dashes. So if the dash means that the word follows. And if the dash is in front, it means that the word precedes. So that's prefix, that's suffix. S is a very common suffix in English. One of its meanings is plural. So umpire, umpires is more than one, right? But it's player, players. But it also can mean the third person singular in verbs like goes, right? Somebody, he goes, which is a big issue for many learners of English. They just forget that there's this little s, okay? And the difference between phonemes and morphemes is that phonemes don't have any meaning. Saying the or z doesn't give us any meaning. It's just the sound. So it only has the form, but no meaning. Morphemes are different because morphemes have the form, so they are pronounced as the, but they also mean something. So the, remember, it's closed item morpheme in English. That means the definiteness, right? It's these particular empires. Or they can have a lexical meaning like umpire, right? Or they can have meaning of creating in past tense in English. So ed is one of those. So the difference between root, so umpire and talk, play or player are all roots. Then they have a corresponding entry in your vocabulary. So they are free morphemes. They're free to exist by themselves. But the suffixes and sometimes and the prefixes as well do not exist by themselves. They have to attach themselves to something. So there is a morpheme s, but it won't mean much unless we attach it to a root. So to give us plural or to give us past tense. And these are known as bound morphemes, right? Because they're bound to the root. To is a preposition that I already mentioned. We have a small number of prepositions in any language, sometimes 20, sometimes 50, and you can just list them all because we never get new prepositions. We are stuck with what we have. And in English, you guys, we have articles, right? There's only two of them, and the. And there are plenty of languages that don't, like Russian doesn't. There are no articles. And there is also an interesting type of bound morphemes. This is the ER here, which creates another root, so to speak, right? So play could be, a game, or it could be a verb to play. But if you add ER, right, it is a suffix, but it's different from S. Adding ER to play creates a new referent, creates a new object in the world. People play. While S does not create anything new, it just creates a bunch of them. That is, it's plurality. So morphemes come in different flavors depending on what they do. But every single language has roots. And basically every single language has these bound morphemes, but the amount and their distribution and function are very, very different. So English is when compared to like German, or again, Russian is a good case. I can do German too, where Russian has tens of thousands of suffixes. I'm not kidding. So if I want, so let's say you have a word, we have a word, a horse, right? And we want to say it's a little horse. Well, we talk to children, we will say a horsey, right? Or a doggy. So we have this additional vowel that creates what we call a diminutive form. Diminutive means smaller version, right? And that's it. You only have this. But if you take a language like Russian or any other Slavic language, Polish, Bulgarian, then these suffixes that create variations of smaller things are numerous. So a horse is лошадь in Russian, and if you want to say a small horse, you'll say лошадка, or you can say лошадюшка, or you can say лошадушка. All of these are different suffixes, and there are many of them. And if you want to go the other way around, you can make something huge. You can say house, дом, and then make it huge, домище. English doesn't have any of that. So people, English speakers who learn Russian, they are really finding themselves that they have to spend a lot of time learning all these bound morphemes, because without them, you can't speak a language that well. And some languages are notoriously known for these bound morphemes, and they're known as agglutinative languages. An agglutinative language is the language that takes the root, umpire, or talk, or play, and adds, well, I was going to say a gazillion, not necessarily gazillion, but 10 suffixes to it. And the word agglutinative comes from, to glue, right? To use glue to add suffixes. Many of the Native American languages are like this. The good thing about them is that each little suffix adds just a little bit of meaning. So in English, you're going to say, I am going. You have this M and ing giving us the sort of duration of the action. In that language, like Finnish is a good example of an agglutinative language. Finnish has 17 suffixes that come at the end of the root to make it, to relate this root to the rest of the context. So you can add a suffix for plurality. You can add a suffix for whether it's we or you. You can add a suffix for leaving something and going into something. But it's only like this for every single of these suffixes. Only one meaning. There's never ambiguity. They never overlap, which makes Finnish, in fact, despite the fact that there are 17 of those, much easier, because you can, once you memorized all 17, you're fine. A language like, in the European language like Russian or German, you don't get separate suffixes. One suffix can mean multiple things simultaneously, and it's difficult. So these languages are difficult to learn. Think about it. One of the activities that I posted for you has to do with what we call constructed languages. Constructed languages are the ones that we created for usually either as an intellectual exercise or a lot of movies. For example, anybody who likes Star Wars knows about Klingon, which is a language that was created for that series. And that was created with the thinking that let's get rid of all this extra stuff, the ambiguities, the multiple overlapping. Let's make it totally transparent and easy. So there is a language like this called Esperanto. Has anybody heard about Esperanto? Star Trek, yes. Star Trek. Thank you, Leroy. Not Star Wars, of course. Esperanto is this language that was completely artificially created from scratch. So you can pronounce it with whatever your native language is, with English accent or Russian accent. But the phonology and morphology and syntax is very logical. So there is even, and then it's been around for 100 years or more, there is even literature in Esperanto. So if you find this fascinating, which I hope you do, then you could go to the society that is about creating new languages and explore a language of your choice. So you can look at Esperanto, you can look at Klingon, you can look at the language in the Games of Thrones. There's many, many, many of them, where all of this ambiguity that characterizes natural languages is taken care of. There is none of that. It's very, very logical. It's like mathematics in a way. Okay, so morphology is wonderful, but it can create difficulties for people who are learning that language, because in addition to the roots, you have to learn a bunch of other things. Okay, so just recap all of what I just said. We think about open morphemes, sometimes also called content. So anything that has the referent and means together, right? Run means to move in a particular fashion. Strange is a quality. And then we have bound morphemes, also known as function morphemes. These are the ones that don't exist on their own. They have to be added to the roots, and here is that classification. So basically, free morphemes are content, and function morphemes could be bound. Occasionally, like prepositions, they can stand on their own. But the most important thing, the difference between morphemes and phonemes, is that morphemes carry meanings and phonemes, sounds, don't. And the textbook discusses this particular interesting point. So let's think English is a very good example of that. In English, we have two types of rules to produce a past tense for a verb. So we can say walk, and we can say walked. That is, he walked yesterday, or something like that. So this is a very productive rule of English. You take ed, right, and you add it to the, it's a bound morpheme, you add it to the free morpheme, to the root, and you get the past tense. So, I don't know, I'm looking for something simple again. Try, he tried, right, easy. But on the other hand, English has a bunch of verbs that do not follow that rule, and you have to memorize them. Can somebody give me an example of how we could produce a verb past tense without using ed, but using idiosyncratic form of that verb? Well, let's take a verb to go. What would be the past tense form of that? Went. Yeah, okay. It's not ed, right? So what happens is, with children, although it's not that massive as some people think, that little kids can actually sometimes say goed. So they take go because they know that there are roots, and they take the bound morpheme that creates past tense and they put the two together. So they say goed. But then, of course, they correct themselves, sometimes within the same day, sometimes within a week, and now they say went. And we have many: swim, swam, we have read, read, we have fight, fought, teach, taught. There is a substantial amount of these verbs. So the question is, what do we do when we have to create a past tense of any verb? Do we always try ed first? Let's say we create a new verb, like to Google, right? So are we going to say Googled? Or are we going to say, I don't know, giggle? I'm just creating it. And this is for the new verbs, but if we take the ones that are already in the language, do we always try the ed rule first? And that's how this dual root processing theory was born. So the idea was that there are two things that we can do. We can either go with ed, or we can go with this special case of creating a new form that is different. All right, at this point, we will stop and we will reconvene on Thursday and pick up from here. Thank you guys for attending. I'll see you Thursday.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too, Leroy.